You know, we grew up in a golden era. We didn't know it was gold at the time we were growing up.
It was a great place to grow up into.
Downtown was only 2 blocks long, but it had everything a downtown should have.
Some of my best friends that I have today are guys I met, you know, in park and recreations in Robbinsdale.
Robbinsdale was his roots. He never forgot the people in the community that helped him, you know, help make it through life.
Look at over and what's transcended over the period of years. I'm saying, my God, what has happened? People come in here, but it's commonplace now.
The drive was where the mansions were. So we all, as kids, grew up, you know, aspiring to live on the drive.
Robbinsdale is a compact hometown community. Makes you feel that you're in a neighborhood and that you're part of a community.
You had the movie theater there, you had the soda fountain, you had the hardware store, you had the bakery, you had the meat market, and it just, you know, I think it was the classic American town. Robbinsdale was almost dreamed up out of whole cloth. You started out with Hennepin County, and then you had this Crystal Township that stretched all the way to the Mississippi River, almost as far as Medicine Lake.
So it included Crystal, Robbinsdale, New Hope, Golden Valley, St. Louis Park, and then Minneapolis. So it was quite a big area.
As Minneapolis grew, it started annexing neighboring communities. And the folks that were in Crystal decided, you know, they didn't want to be annexed by Minneapolis and start having to pay higher taxes. And so they formed Crystal Village.
They were being taxed about $1.50 a year. And they said, well, what's that for? It's for the lamplighter that was lighting the lamps on Lyndale Avenue there in Camden. When they opened up the state fact, it was actually earlier than that. It was 1852 when they first opened up the territory for settlers. And 2 people came, John Bohannon and John Doe, and they ended up in Camden about 44th to 45th and Fremont and like that.
The railroad and the depot were here before there were any buildings in Robbinsdale. And the Great Northern and a lot of the railroads in that era put a couple of section men to work, you know, track workers, every 5 miles. And the stations built around those.
And that's when Parker decided he would build right in that area, and then they put a station there and they called it Parker Station because he was the first man that had any land out there.
His name was Alfred Parker, and he was an early settler. He was a Civil War veteran.
He had the land that was the central part of town, and his house stood for well into while I was around Robbinsdale.
There was a church, they built a little village hall, and a blacksmith. That was about it. At one point, a man named A.B. Robbins, Andrew Boney Robbins, was coming through on a train. He had become a state senator. Before that, he was the mayor of Wilmer. And he passed through Robbinsdale, and he, you know, just noticed how close it was to Minneapolis. And he was enthralled with the landscape and thought, here's these 2 lakes, and they're really not that far from that chain of lakes. And he decided to buy, you know, go in, take a look, and buy as much property as he could.
Robbins came through and bought land and platted it. And Lars Nassett came through here with his uncle, who was building the Lutheran seminary. He bought land from Robbins at the corner of 42nd and Broadway, and built the very first grocery store and general store here.
Since 1882. It's the original butcher shop from day one.
Well, it was originally Coulter had it, and then he sold it to Gus Urban, and Urban had it, and then 2 generations of Hoffmans were in there. Then Lindenfelters took over from Hackenmüller's, but they're relatives, so it's had that many owners. But it's still pretty much the same butcher shop. In 1888, Christensen built the blacksmith shop on the opposite corner from Nassett, and the town built up around those 2 businesses.
He built a great big palace on Lower Twin Lake on the west side and moved his family there. Robbins just worked tirelessly for his vision here. He was starting to make all sorts of improvements. He wanted to put in sidewalks, he wanted to plant trees, he was attracting more businesses to Main Street. He'd opened up a factory. He wanted to have the streetcars run out there and start building his suburb. Folks in Crystal decided that they didn't want to pay taxes for new sidewalks, etc., and they dissolved the village of Crystal. Then they created the village of Robbinsdale, and there was some argument about naming it. Some people wanted to name it something else, and the rumor is that Robbins wanted it named after him, and he was going to take all of his factories and monies and toys and go home if they weren't going to name it after him.
It could have been named either Robbinsdale or Parker Station. And Mr. Nasseth, at the time that they decided to have a post office in Robbinsdale, was the postmaster. And when it came time that they wanted a name, he's the one that named it. He said, let's see, should I call it Parker Station or Robbinsdale? And he called it Robbinsdale, and that's,
Its borders have pretty much stayed the same. It's about 2 square miles or so. That would have been 1893. He really wanted to get his real estate business off the ground, and he did a nice job attracting people to Robbinsdale to build modest homes. And the city started growing. You're still talking about a village of 600-700 people.
When they started getting traffic through here, the farmers couldn't climb the hill.
And all the farmers used to come down with their wagons further north and west from here and come right through Robbinsdale.
It was too much of a grade for a cart and or a wagon and horses to make.
The horse teams that were taking their product to market in Minneapolis had a hard time.
The climbing of that hill with their loads were almost unbelievably huge.
Although one of the first things Robbinsdale did when it became a city was take a saloon fund they had started and take all the revenue they got from that to level the hill, which was called Crystal Hill. And they took the fill from that and dumped it into the lake.
So that established the Bottineau Prairie Road to what's now France Avenue, and then they built Oakdale that came into a Lowry at the top of the hill, and that was the shortcut for the teams.
The Robbinsdale Fire Department actually started and helped start the other communities, Crystal, Brooklyn Center, Golden Valley. They used to take care of a lot of the land around here, and you used to have peat fires all over the place and grass fires all over the place before a lot of the departments. A call came in, they had no monitors, they had a telephone system, but they also had the siren. So what happened is that when he heard the siren, he'd get up in the middle of the night, get his clothes on and go. And then go to the station house, and on the chalkboard would be where the fire was. And that's how they had to handle it. what they did is they had a calling system so that when the dispatcher would call 1 or 2 people, those people would call 2 or 3 people, and they would call 2 or 3 people, and then we had a total amount of calling for the response.
They would blow the siren when there was a fire, and then the volunteer firemen would come, and if you were in the barber shop getting a haircut, you got half a haircut until the barber came back.
You'd be getting your haircut by him, and all of a sudden the alarm would go off. And right on the hook hung his fire hat. And, you know, so all of a sudden he turned to I think it was Jake in front, and he'd say, "You'll have to finish Earl here," or something, you know, "I got to get going," and he'd grab his hat and out the back door he'd go, because he was just a short distance over to the fire station there.
The way Robbinsdale is built, it's surprising we haven't lost much more.
The streetcars. I remember they had woven seats, woven out of some kind of rush.
You could take the streetcar all over the place, and that was the turn of the 19th century. And so by you having the streetcar there, for a dime, you could get a token and go from Robbinsdale and go all the way to Minneapolis, or if you wanted, you could take a trip to Excelsior, Lake Minnetonka.
Streetcars were, when you look back at them and you see what we had and what the cost was to do it in those days compared to now, you know, with their light rail and all this stuff they're talking about, and streetcars, they're starting to talk about streetcars again. You think, my God, I lived long enough for this thing to recycle itself.
The streetcar line was called the Northern Car Company. About the time that the area came to A.B. Robbins' attention, he built his own streetcar factory and built his own streetcar line. It was horse-drawn at first, but later he got it electrified. And that ran all the way out to his palace on Twin Lake. You could bring your family out, you could you could go camping.
Things have changed a lot, but things are sort of the same. When my mom was going to St. Catherine's, she lived at 40th and Quail, and she would hop on the streetcar right in downtown Robbinsdale, and she would get all the way over to Randolph Avenue in St. Paul, where St. Catherine's is.
The streetcar was available. We used to ride it. We would walk to downtown, 42nd and West Broadway, take it downtown, take it back, all the time.
I do remember going up to Mueller's drugstore with my mother and waiting for the streetcar to come because we were going downtown.
Streetcars were big then. The only reason streetcars went out is because they started building buses by the gross, and they wanted all the cities to have buses.
I can remember the first bus ride I took when the streetcar stopped, and my heart just pounded that I would not get off on the right corner. It seems so simple nowadays and everything, but it wasn't simple back then.
The Robbinsdale City Band is something that is nothing short of awe-inspiring to me.
It started actually when the city needed to raise some money to build a new library or an extension to the library. The Grinnells who started the band are still around, and they're very proud of having the distinction of starting up this band that's continuing to go. Mrs. Grinnell turned to her husband, William Grinnell, and said, "You know, you should get that group together that plays music and hold this fundraiser for the library." They got a group of about 12 people together, and that was the formation of what is now the Robbinsdale City Band over 100 years later.
I'm amazed by the artists that can stand in front of a wooden box with a bunch of white and black keys on it and have music come out, or play a trombone or a clarinet or anything. It's astounding to me. They lead off at the very front of our Whiz Bang Days parade every year. It's still very cherished within the city of Robbinsdale and beyond. They're well known beyond just Robbinsdale, and you know, being together for more than 100 years is amazing no matter what you're doing.
At the time they were done with rehearsals, it would be hot, they would be thirsty, and of course it also was a prime spot for them to go to quench their thirst.
Adolph's had a back room in his bar, and they would run interviews in the back. They'd have them come with their instruments, and while the bars, they were serving the people in front, they would be playing away for all they were worth in the back room there to see if they could make the band or not.
It's very nice to have a group of people that will yield the stage, that are performers, and do it happily. They're very supportive of the future of our community and these young people.
People forget that Crystal Lake used to be a really nice lake. It was spring-fed, and it was probably 10 to 15 acres bigger than it is now. There was a guy named Nash who was a farmer over there on Crystal Lake. Him and his son they set up the Crystal Bath House, which was a big deal for maybe 15 or 20 years. He made his money renting out lockers, renting out boats. They had a great big water wheel, so you'd swim out a little ways into the lake, and then you'd climb this wheel and it would spin and drop you back into the lake. Robin's vision for the lake, of course, was that this is so close to that parkway that's being built. You can come up here and buy a piece of this lake, and that property is going to be worth a pile of money because the parkway is extending up here, and Robbinsdale is going to be a city of fine homes.
That's what the Memorial Drive was about, is that each tree represented a World War I soldier.
It was a war memorial to World War I veterans. We grew up, and my brothers and I, my sister and I, all thinking it was a World War II memorial. There wasn't much interpretive material to tell you that it was a World War I memorial. There's nothing on the markers that suggest the date of the birth or death of the soldier or nurse. There's 5 nurses there. And there was nothing to suggest that it was a memorial to the Hennepin County veterans who gave their lives. The way to honor the individual soldiers was to come up with mock gravestones. It didn't start out as gravestones, it started out as markers that were in the shape of a cross if the soldier were Christian, or in the Star of David if the soldier were Jewish. And they were originally placed so that they were upright next to the tree. They put them in an order, alphabetical order, starting by last name, starting at the hospital and working the way north, and then ultimately east. And so the parkway is 1.5 miles from the south to the north, and then 1 mile from the northernmost point east to Weber Parkway. After a while, I don't know that they described it as vandalism, but clearly maintenance and other issues, breakage became a problem, so then the decision was made to put them in concrete and lay them down horizontally next to the trees, and that's where they are today.
In the 1920s, the village gained notoriety with every new issue of Captain Billy's Whiz Bang. Created by local veteran Wilford Hamilton Fawcett, the Little Humor magazine launched a publishing empire. Billy Fawcett comes back from the Spanish Civil War, and he's looking for a job, and he's a bit of a writer, and he decides, I'm going to put together this little magazine of dirty jokes.
He actually started it by the first ones were on a borrowed typewriter, and they were mimeographed, and he passed them out to wounded veterans and service members, and that's what started it.
He was selling 1 million copies inside the first year. And what he did with that money is he built this 3-story building in downtown Robbinsdale which was the beginning of Fawcett Publishing. The amazing thing is that he uses Robbinsdale the way Garrison Keillor would use Lake Wobegon, except he uses real names. He talks about he was sitting out one day with Mr. Howard from Howard Lumber, or he's talking about his farmhand named Gus, who was Gus Urban, who owned the meat market, and he drops all these people's names and he'll write little songs about how wonderful Robbinsdale is and talk about the Robbinsdale Airport, which he got started. Fawcett Publishing went on to come up with things like Captain Marvel, came up with the idea for magazines like True Confessions, Mechanics, spelled with an X, True Detective, things that really took off in the 30s too. But in the 20s it was Captain Billy's Whiz Bang and Smokehouse Poetry. I think America would know Captain Billy's Whiz Bang magazine from the musical The Music Maker, where they start singing about it.
He led an amazing life. He and his wife had 4 children, and Fawcett Publications started basically in Robbinsdale. Its location was where the patio is for Nona Rosa's. Fawcett Publications began in 1919 in Robbinsdale. Billy Fawcett was born in 1885 and he died in 1940. So he enjoyed starting his business of Fawcett Publications, which is one of the larger publishing houses historically in this country. The biggest thing related to Robbinsdale is the Whiz Bang magazine. Personally, I have a few Whiz Bang magazines that I've purchased on eBay and things like that, and they're a real joy to flip through because it gives you a feel of the sense of society at that time.
The magazine is great, though. I would urge everybody who can find it to just take a look through it and read through it. It is, it's a bit dated, but it's really funny.
Robbinsdale Goodwill Days was started by the business community, and it was started in 1936.
It was a big celebration. There were floats, and people would line up to watch a parade.
Started in the 30s, but it wasn't really their own idea to start with. They went out, another town around here called Hopkins started Raspberry Festival. And people from Robbinsdale that went down and saw that thought that was a pretty good idea.
The celebration in Robbinsdale was Goodwill Days until 1967 or so, when it changed over to be Whiz Bang Days.
And then that's where Whiz Bang Days gets its name from, is from the Whiz Bang magazine that Fawcett Publications produced there. Whiz Bang was changed to Whiz Bang Days several years after Captain Billy Fawcett's passing.
It was Robbinsdale School District 24. Great place to go to school.
They built the school, and that was 1936. And they had 960 kids come. The school grew and grew, and of course after the Second World War, there was a huge boom of children being born to the soldiers as they came home and so forth. And as we all know, that boom expanded to the point where schools that had been built previously, whether it was for Robbinsdale, Hopkins even had a second school, Richfield built an extra school, Bloomington built 2 extra schools like Robbinsdale did. It exploded, and so then they built the new high school over on 36th, well, it's 37th actually, right off Highway 100, the second high school, and then made the first one on Region junior high. Mr. Cooper was one of them, who actually Cooper High School was named after later. Went over to the state and Capitol and found out what it would take to get money to build a high school.
E.J. Cooper was always the kind of a person that wanted to expand Robbinsdale School District. Whenever there was a chance to get more territory, he would do it.
He loved the school district, and he made it strong.
He was a very energetic guy. He was always moving, and he was always talking to you. He was very personable. He would personally hire the teachers The Coopers were very education oriented. I remember that EJ and Levon would always give my mom and dad's kids books for presents, for birthdays and Christmas and things like that. They were just very oriented toward education.
It was so good that when my husband and I had our children, I wanted to live in Robbinsdale for the school system.
I remember when it was a little 27-bed hospital next to the traffic circle.
It's the building we're sitting in right now was the hospital at the time. And it was really a pretty facility. It was nice. It had marble floors. It was called Victory Memorial Hospital back then, and it was set up by Dr. Samuelson as a not-for-profit hospital, which was kind of typically how they did it, but not all of them were not-for-profit here. And it was just in response to the fact that people had to go a long ways in to get emergent care, urgent emergent care. You know, a cut, a laceration or an injury, a broken bone, have to drive downtown to get it, and now they can come into the suburbs and stay close to home.
To think that the start of that whole hospital was Dr. Samuelson's little brick building, which is still there. The hospital was built up around it.
So in 1939, when Dr. Samuelson built his hospital, it's the first suburban hospital actually in the Twin Cities. It took doctors 20 minutes to get from downtown out here, which they thought was horrible. And they weren't sure they were going to do it. Early on, they got really great doctors out here that did really great work. And so the ORs were a big carrier, and the OR complex here was a big profitability center for helping things grow as well.
He actually, probably made the neighborhood what it is now. The hospital was used for maternity, and the first baby born there, they gave her the middle name of Vicky for the name of the hospital. It changed to North Memorial in the late 50s.
The Volk brothers owned the Terrace, they built the Terrace Theater. They owned the Robin Theater. They owned the bowling alley, but they built the Terrace Theater at that time.
I was in high school when they built the Terrace Theater, and that was a big thing in town. And the favorite date place to go was to the movies at the Terrace, because that was state of the art.
It was Hollywood. There was big Klieg lights out there. You could see it from miles away. And people would drive up in their cars, and there'd be a footman there to open the door and park your car. One of the main things I remember about that theater was a TV lounge, and there was a coffee lounge, and there was a couple of other lounges. It was just absolutely a dream.
During the 1955 season, going to Milky Field, and that place would have 10,000 people there almost. It was the biggest thing in town on a Saturday night. The place just rocked.
Robbinsdale pretty much dominated the state at that time.
The 4 years of high school, only experienced one loss at Robbinsdale.
We had a bunch of athletes, and they were coached very well. I think with the wrestling team, Woodward was a wonderful coach.
Wrestling might have been their best thing, because until just a few years ago, Robbinsdale had won the most wrestling titles in Minnesota state history.
Wrestling became so big, there's more wrestlers from professional wrestlers from Robbinsdale, Minnesota than any place else in the country.
There was Vern Gagne, Larry Henning, Kurt Henning, John Nord, all sorts of famous wrestlers.
Robbinsdale, the whole community, was a big, big part of his life. He would always tell us about wanting to play sports. He'd listen to the radio at that time with his grandfather and listen to professional wrestling on the radio. He met a lot of great people, Mark Woodward, Red Sadaki, John Grogelko, who was his wrestling coach, and those are people that he always talked about later on in life, that they were the foundation for him to achieve what he did later on in life. He always came back and contributed to Robbinsdale High School. He'd go back and work out with the wrestling team. We're very proud of him, our family is, and what he did, not only for us, but for professional wrestling, for the community, for the state of Minnesota. He's quite an individual and a great personality.
We had really good coaching. Nerdahl and Spurrier and Gregelko, and all those people were there for years and years and years, and just developed a very high quality athletic program.
John Gregelko came along and was a fantastic coach for the wrestling team, and I think that's when they were really famous for being winners.
A lot of it was the talent that we had and the coaching that we had, and the dedication that the people put into it. On Thursday before the game, we always met at Nerdahl's house in his basement. There'd be 50 guys, and they'd be sitting on the steps up in his kitchen, and we had a lot of camaraderie. That's where kind of the interplay was, jokes being told and stuff like that. But every Thursday, for an hour and a half, we'd be in Irv's basement, just going over last-minute assignments, but really just getting the team together, getting the camaraderie together, getting to be a team rather than just individual guys. That's one of the biggest things that most people remember about being at Irv's house on Thursday night before a game.
I think that's why Robbinsdale was such a powerhouse. They had students all the way from Hamel and Corcoran, and there wasn't any other high school to go to. So they attracted a whole lot of big, strong farm kids.
If you took the top students, they were pretty close to being the top athletes. And Robbinsdale was the largest school in the state of Minnesota. So it was the cream of the cream. It wasn't just good students at a small school. This was the top of the top and the largest school in the state.
I look back on Robbinsdale High School and the times I spent there as the foundation of the formation for me growing into adulthood.
So there's like this deep, certainly passion, but like love for Robbinsdale. And, I think it stems a lot from the high school and the strong community that was behind that high school and that came about because of the high school.
In 1981, due to the decline in the school district 281 enrollment, the decision was made to close the senior high school. Superintendent Hood recommended that Robbinsdale should stay open.
Nobody in Robbinsdale wanted Robbinsdale closed, and they said that. And they went to these board meetings time in and time again and said, no matter what school you close, we don't want Robbinsdale closed.
I remember going to a candlelight vigil with my mom and dad and sitting on the steps of the old high school, fighting to keep it open. I knew how important that high school was, especially to my mom and dad, who both graduated from there. A decision wasn't made yet, and there was going to be some additional input and more discussion. But then kind of at the midnight hour, a decision was made, and that was that.
They made a decision without anybody at the meeting to close Robbinsdale, and that was the worst thing they could have done.
It was disappointing because schools are the lifeblood of a community, particularly high schools.
Mr. Milkey, who was principal for 32 years of the times Robbinsdale had a school, of 46 years Robbinsdale had a high school, said it was the worst decision made ever because what Robbinsdale did was tie the school to the city and give it some identification.
It was a struggle for a lot of people to deal with because it was just gone, and there's nothing anybody could do about it.
To this day, people that are my age or older or even younger are totally upset by the way it was handled and that they closed it down.
I found that I liked public service very much. And that's when I decided to run for mayor. I think the town is doing very well, but I want to give maybe a different perspective to it.
It was an interesting transition, the early 90s, where things started to change a lot, where you had the town center mall go in, the new police and fire building. So I think there's a lot of changes to the downtown area and to Robbinsdale in general that she was mayor for. I think a lot of them were good changes.
I suggested changes that they could vote on, such as, I think we should televise our council meetings. Let the people know we have this wonderful community education. That was the first thing we did. Good move. You get the people interested in what this city is doing. I found out that if you got an economic development authority within your city and the council being the members of it, by law you could do a lot more in the development of your city. One of my favorite parts of being mayor was to be there when we had our centennial in 1993. We made sure that we did something different every month in a way of celebrating 100 years of our town.
That year, Whiz Bang Days was probably the most fun. It was just a blast. I mean, everything, the parties people had, the parade, like the festivities, that was kind of like the highlight, the glory days. That Whiz Bang Days specifically, I remember very well. And it was pretty exciting when you got this cool town, 100 years. It was a pretty cool accomplishment. And even after the high school closing, we're still busy having a lot of fun and keeping it a great place to live.
We've got something that took over 100 years to make, and you can't build it overnight. A lot of other communities have tried, and they're beautiful business districts, but they're not the same as a historic downtown district.
Some of the businesses that have been around for a long time, Hack & Mueller's, K-Marine, Carroll's, those businesses were actually a foundation to help really bring in newer businesses.
We had started a dance studio in our basement with just neighbor kids. We go get neighbor kids and teach them in our basement.
We built this building in 1977, and we've been in Robbinsdale forever and have no intention of ever leaving Robbinsdale.
And I took it over in '79 in September, and I've been here 35, so Hackemiller's been 38 and 35. That's quite a few years. This has been my pride and joy. I don't know, I love getting up, go to work every day.
Hack & Mueller's brings in so many people from outside of Robbinsdale. I think Gordy, the owner, one day said he had like 900 unique customers come through his door in like a couple days during the holidays. To be able to bring in people from outside of Robbinsdale benefits other businesses as well.
I think when we first built the studio here, there were a few businesses, and when we would pull in our patrons from Brooklyn Park and Brooklyn Center and all the other areas, that it brought a lot of business into Robbinsdale just because of the people we brought in. So that made us very proud.
The local businesses, again, add that stability to our community. They continue to help Robbinsdale be a great place to live and work. And the new businesses that are coming, they recognize that, and they're starting to get more involved. And they see the uniqueness of Robbinsdale.
Family businesses, I mean, you look at Travell, Willette's, Ace Hardware, None and Roses, and the Pig Ate My Pizza. So it's really nice to have that. It really is.
Travail restaurant was kind of instrumental with actually putting Robbinsdale on the map just recently, because people know who Robbinsdale is because of that restaurant that became so very popular.
You look at some of the new businesses like Willette's, the new brewery in town, and some of the other restaurants that they all kind of feed off each other. So it's been exciting. These, the new restaurants like Travail and Nona Rosa's and Pig Ate My Pizza, First Crack Cafe in Athens, all of those are doing really well.
You have to have this young mentality that the people that are coming up are why you've been working so hard, and you've got to trust them that they're going to be just as smart and diligent as you were and as your ancestors were, and things are going to change, and let's try to make it go in a positive way.
The City Council currently is very much on board with, you know, keeping Robbinsdale, being proactive and making Robbinsdale a place where people want to continue to live, not only for this generation, but also for future generations.
This new young mayor is doing a great job. He's trying to build Robbinsdale back up again.
Robbinsdale had such a big impact on me. I felt obligated to come back and give back to my community. And I want to be able to have our current youth, whose parents maybe weren't from Robbinsdale, to have that kind of same feeling. And that's how we can keep Robbinsdale, you know, strong and prosperous as we move forward. The thing that I always stuck in my mind about Robbinsdale is that connectivity with high school and the memories and kind of that small town atmosphere, and it still survives, especially in a very metropolitan area.
Robbinsdale is a very, very super community. Fine people. It's still a small town.
If you want a community that's, I'll say, progressive, forward-thinking, you know, very adaptable, a community that is safe, that values education, that values you know, their neighbors and, you know, their quality of life, then Robbinsdale is a perfect place for you.
There's still enough of what was to let it know that, yeah, it's changed, but not to that major degree. So.
Robbinsdale was named for entrepreneur, politician, and real estate developer Andrew B. Robbins. While serving in the Minnesota State Senate, Robbins often passed through the area just north of Minneapolis by train. Impressed by the landscape, he purchased 90 acres of rolling hills and lakes. In 1887, he platted a tract called Robbinsdale Park. 5 years later, the development was incorporated as a village bearing his name. Along with the rest of the country, Robbinsdale grew up in the 20th century, but the first suburb of Minneapolis still feels like the small town Andrew B. Robbins dreamed up more than a century ago.